Hi, so we're back. Now I'm going to talk about how we enter all of the information from the JD investment problem into Excel/Solver. And what I've done just so we can reference it is the actual formulation that I wrote in my in the Word document. I did want to recognize I did make a small mistake for the risk tolerance calculation. Um, the risk index for the growth funds is actually zero point 0.1. It's not 0.01. I just want to recognize that. I tried making that note in the video description box of the Word document formulation in the last video, but it shows you how much experience I have uploading on YouTube, which is absolutely zero. Because I can't find the note anywhere. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm trying my best. Just want to help everybody out to understand these problems. Okay, so here is my problem formulation. Here is the Excel template. Everything in red here are things that I've added myself. I highly encourage you that if a certain template doesn't necessarily make sense, to figure out ways to make it make sense for you. Because at the end of the day, if you enter everything correctly into Solver, it doesn't matter where you put pieces of information. I routinely do this for all the problems just so I can make sense of it. Now, having templates is great in that it does save some time, but the downside to it is that it forces you to into the template creator's way of thinking. And what I realize is when it comes to math and accounting and programming problems, people don't think about this stuff the same way. I'm going to try my best to explain how I have gone about all of this. And hopefully, if you understand the way that I think, it'll help you in the way you need to think about these problems so that they make sense. All right, so first things first is entering all of the parameter information into the template, which is here. So returns are pretty easy. You can get that information here. Your return for growth funds is 18%. For income, it was 12.5%. And then for money market, it was 7.5%. And I've translated into decimals, obviously, because that's how you do calculations. Um, uh, so the min, max, and the risk was the trickier parts. So here I've only put in, technically, the minimum for the growth is 20% of the total value of the fund, but I've only put the 20% here. Now, if it makes more sense to you to put 0.2 of the total overall fund, you can do that. No one's stopping you from doing that. That doesn't make it wrong or correct. If it helps you make sense of it, that's totally fine. But here, I'm going to leave it as 0.2. Minimum, same for income. And then I think the minimum for money market was 0.3 or 30%. And there are maximums for how much you can invest for growth and for income. It was 40% of the total overall portfolio for growth, and then 50% of the total overall portfolio for income. And then for risk, here I just put in the risk index for each of the funds. So like I mentioned, it was 0.1 for growth. It's 0.07 for income and 0.01 for money market. Right, now, next piece of information to enter. What is the maximum risk? That is here. We knew that. It was going to be 0.05. And then the total funds available was $800,000, which is the amount you can invest in the amount. Okay, great. So here are your decision variables. You don't enter things here. And then it asks for a total, so just make sure you create a sum. And then this is where I did my magic, or things I did to make sense. So in order, like I mentioned before, in order to get that risk calculation, you have to do a weighted average. And in the calculation for weighted average, you need to be able to know how much, what the percentage of growth, income, and money market is, and the amount invested out of the overall total. So that's a very simple calculation. You take the amount that's been invested in growth and you divide it by the total. And I did that for each of the type of investment here. Again, this just helps me. This is why I like to add it. And then, so when it came to actually calculating the risk, I can get away with doing a sum product of the risk times the percent of the fund, which is how you calculate the risk tolerance, or at least the total risk of the portfolio, right? Returns, pretty self-explanatory. A sum product of what you've actually allocated times the return of each of the accounts. All right, so again, this part was not included, but again, it helps me. I added it to make sure that I was making sure that I was adding all of the constraints, because there was a minimum and maximum for growth, a minimum and maximum for income, and then a minimum for the money market funds. So what I do here is I reference the actual decision variable, and here I just, but in this case I'm declaring a minimum, so it has to be more than equal to, in this case, 20% of the overall total. And I did this for each of these. So here it's referencing, actually this is wrong. It needs to reference the growth variable, and it has to be less than equal to 40% of the overall total. And then again here, I have to reference the income variable, and it has to be more than equal to 20% of the overall total. And here, income maximum, I reference the income here, and it has to be less than equal to 50% of the overall total. And then again here, I reference the money market variable, and it has to be more than or equal to 30% of the overall total. So I hope that makes sense. So now we enter into Solver, and this is, I got really frustrated with this because I feel like this is something she should have mentioned, because the way that this is formulated as is, it's not going to let, Solver's not going to run it, and I will show you why in a moment. But let's go ahead and enter our decision variable, enter all of our stuff into Solver, and it's gonna, I'm gonna warn you, it's gonna error out for a really dumb reason. Not really a dumb reason, but I feel like we should have been told this. All right, so your set objective is you have to maximize your return. So I reference the field here for the return, which is here. Click on maximum by changing these decision variables. Easy peasy. All right. So first, let's go ahead and deal with the constraints based on the client's needs and wishes. So here, your maximum risk, it has to be less than or equal to that 0.05, which is up here. And then you can only, there's only $800,000 available, so this total has to be less than or equal to $800,000. Great. All right, and now we have to put in the constraints for how much has to be invested in the growth, income, and money market accounts. So here, again, this references this growth. So you can honestly, for these, you can actually directly reference the decision variable that you've highlighted. But here, this just makes it easy because I know I'm, just for my line of sight. So this has to be more than or equal to this. Again, this field right here is the calculated value of 20% times the total. And then just go down the line. This is why I like doing this, because it makes it easy to enter these variables into Solver and I don't get too confused. All right, hit enter. That's my last one. So this is what check I like to do. I just count how many constraints I've had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just to make sure I've entered them all in. And then make sure this is checked off because we want to make sure that none of the constraints are negative. But what I'm going to show you is that this isn't going to run. It says encountered an error in the objective cell or constraint cell. So what's happening what's happening in this super annoying scenario is that when you check off this constraint, make unconstrained variables non-negative, Solver like solver won't check for negative values, but it does check for 0. In this scenario, it is a valid constraint that if all of these are 0, it checks a scenario where all of these things are 0. And what happens is you can't calculate the risk portfolio if you're trying to divide something by 0. And that's why it's causing errors. And and so kind of the way, because it's trying to divide by 0, it's causing errors and running within and causing that error. Solver encounter an error value in the objective cell or a constraint cell because it can't divide by 0 because it's testing for 0. Now, in order to get around this, what I did was anytime a total is referenced, I just say 800,000, because overall, in order to maximize your return, you should spend every bit of money you get. So this is what I did in order to so that it references the total as 800,000 rather than risk of having solver see a total of 0, because it's a valid test according to solver. So in this case, since I know that the overall investment fund is going to be $800,000, so here in the, again, these are the decision, these are the little pieces of information that I added myself. So anytime you reference a total, I just put $800,000. So here, growth divided by $800,000. Here, income divided by $800,000. Same here. This divided by $800,000 because I know I have a maximum of $800,000. If you want, you can even reference total funds available. That way, if let's say you come across a question where they change the investment amount, it makes it easy to change. So let's do that. And then total stays the same. Risk portfolio stays the same. Now, because this calculation is divided by $800,000 and not a 0, your risk or portfolio is coming up as 0 rather than an error here. So turn the same thing, and then again here, instead of referencing the total, I reference $800,000 because that's how much we have to invest. So we can do that here if I wanted, which I'm going to do. It's a really silly error, and I feel like that's pretty critical to know that sometimes solver will test for 0. And one way to get around that is to do this, or you say your investments has to be more than 1, but I even tried that and that didn't work. This is the workaround that I was able to do in order to even get a solution. So here I'll go ahead and run solver. I'm gonna, just because I don't know if this is all correct, I'm just gonna make it easy for myself and do it all over again. So set objective is this, which we want to maximize. Changing the variables here. We're going to add our constraints. So the total has to be less than or equal to $800,000. Your risk has to be less than or equal to 0.05. And then your minimum has to be more than or equal to this. Your maximum has to be less than or equal to that. Your income has to be more than or equal to this. Your income has to be less than or equal to this. And this has to be more than or equal to this. Okay. Count my restraints just to make sure I have the correct number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And hit solve. All right, so that's how I was able to actually run a solution. I know there was one here that I referenced incorrectly. Yep, so let me do this. This is another thing too. It's so important to make sure that before you even run solver that you're referencing the correct pieces of information. So I'm going to rerun solver just in case that caused any problems. Did not. And there you go. And I finally got a solution. So this video is really long, but I hoped I helped you guys with this information.